Now we step into a world where personal feelings were secondary to power, family alliances, and legacy. In ancient Rome, marriage wasn't a union of hearts. It was a strategy, a carefully negotiated pact between families built not on affection, but on status, politics, and control. Love had little to do with it. Marriage was more transaction than vow, and within that structure, fidelity, at least for men, was never the expectation. Roman husbands were not only permitted to be unfaithful, they were in many ways expected to be. Affairs weren't shameful. They were simply part of public life. Many of these relationships were with courtesans, women admired for their charm, wit, and companionship. These liaisons were public, enduring, and often celebrated. No one saw them as a threat to a man's respectability. But what truly sets Rome apart is that same-sex relationships between men weren't just accepted. They were a visible and often honored part of society. There was no hiding, no condemnation, no moral panic, and certainly no modern boxes like gay or straight. Romans didn't define relationships by gender. They defined them by hierarchy. What mattered wasn't who you loved, but how that relationship was structured. It all came down to power. The dominant partner, the one who led, initiated, and acted, maintained masculine honor, whether his partner was male or female. On the other hand, taking on the passive or receptive role, especially for an adult male, could carry social stigma. That role was tied to femininity and submission, and Roman masculinity had no room for perceived weakness. This logic applied across the board. In a typical male-female relationship, the man was the protector, the provider, the initiator. The woman was expected to be passive, obedient, supportive. But when two men entered a relationship, Roman society still demanded the same structure. One must lead, and the other must yield. And yet, there were exceptions, especially when the younger partner was still a teenager. In those cases, such relationships were not only accepted, but often framed as educational or even noble. They were seen as mentorship, a passage into manhood, a tradition rooted in Greek customs like Pedarasti, which Roman elites adopted with their own cultural spin. In the Roman world, love, sex, status, and identity were inseparable. Relationships weren't judged by emotion, they were measured by power. And to truly understand Roman intimacy, one must leave behind modern ideas of romance and equality, and enter a realm where even desire served the empire. In ancient Roman society, relationships between older men and teenage boys weren't just tolerated, they were structured and, at times, even idealized. One such structure was known as pedarasti, a dynamic borrowed from earlier Greek traditions. In this arrangement, the elder man, the erastes, would form an intimate, often romantic connection with a younger boy, known as the eromenos. But this wasn't solely about physical attraction. These relationships frequently involved mentorship, education, and social guidance. The older man helped the boy navigate the world of politics, power, and elite Roman life, offering him a path to influence and respectability. Yet, even in a culture obsessed with dominance, masculinity, and strict social roles, reality often broke the mold. Some of Rome's most powerful figures lived lives that openly defied convention. One of the most talked about examples? Julius Caesar. Celebrated as a military genius and political titan, Caesar was the embodiment of Roman strength, at least in public, but behind closed doors, rumors painted a very different picture. Whispers in the Senate suggested that Caesar, despite all his authority, may have preferred a more submissive role in his private relationships with men. For Romans, this wasn't just gossip, it was deeply unsettling. How could a man so publicly dominant contradict expectations so drastically in his personal life? The mere suggestion that Caesar played the passive role in any relationship was enough to spark mockery, satire, and endless political jabs. In a society where image was everything, even intimate rumors could undermine a legacy. Then came Emperor Hadrian, a ruler who didn't just bend the rules of Roman love, he rewrote them entirely. Like most emperors, Hadrian was married to a woman, but few believe the union held any romantic weight. His heart, it seemed, belonged elsewhere, to a young man named Antinous. Hadrian's affection for Antinous went far beyond formality. He ensured the boy received the best education and brought him along on official tours across the empire. Together they explored cities, crossed continents, and built a bond that was personal, emotional, and deeply intimate. But that bond was tragically cut short. While traveling through Egypt, Antinous drowned in the Nile under mysterious circumstances. Some claimed it was an accident. Others whispered it was something more, perhaps even a ritual sacrifice. Whatever the truth, Hadrian's response was nothing short of extraordinary. Overcome with grief, the emperor ordered an entire city to be built in Antinous's honor, Antinopolis, near the site of his death. He had the boy's body mummified and brought back to Rome, a rare and sacred rite. Hadrian minted coins with Antinous's image, commissioned countless statues, and, most shockingly, declared him a god. In Roman history, very few mortals were ever granted divine status. Antinous became one of them. His worship spread across the empire, from the temples of Egypt to the heart of Rome. Shrines were erected, ceremonies held, and Hadrian's love story lived on as one of the most legendary romances in the ancient world. But Hadrian wasn't the only emperor who shocked Roman society with the intensity of his affections. Then came Nero. If Hadrian's love was mournful and sacred, Nero's was theatrical and defiant. While many rulers kept their male lovers hidden behind palace walls, Nero brought his into the spotlight. Not once, but twice, Nero publicly married male partners. In one striking case, he wed a former slave named Pythagoras. But what truly stunned Rome wasn't just the marriage, it was Nero's role in it. During the ceremony, Nero dressed as a bride, complete with veil and full wedding regalia, stepping into the symbolic role of the woman. For a society built on rigid gender roles and public displays of power, this was an earthquake. The emperor, Rome's ultimate symbol of control and masculinity, had upended every expectation by choosing to present himself in the submissive role, not in secret but in full public view. The reaction was swift, confused, and intense. Nero's theatrics may have shocked Rome, but they also revealed something deeper, that in a society obsessed with dominance, even the most powerful men sometimes stepped outside the rules. Later in his reign, Nero made yet another bold and deeply controversial move. He married a young male slave named Sporus. But unlike his earlier public spectacle, this time he made sure to take the traditionally masculine role in the relationship, likely to soothe public opinion and maintain his imperial image. The message was carefully crafted. Even an emperor couldn't fully abandon Roman expectations. He might follow his heart in private, but in public, appearances still mattered. Beneath the imperial robes and golden laurels, the private lives of Roman emperors were filled with contradiction. Some were driven by passion, others by grief or control. But all of them lived under immense pressure, not just to rule, but to embody Rome's ideal of manhood, dominance, composure, power. Their personal desires often clashed with the roles they were expected to perform. And Nero, more than most, seemed to defy the script entirely. His relationship with Sporus, though unusual, took a disturbing turn. According to ancient sources, Nero ordered the boy to be castrated, not out of desire or affection, but to force him into the role of a symbolic wife. In the emperor's eyes, it wasn't enough to love Sporus. He needed the illusion of a traditional marriage, one that affirmed his masculinity and control in the eyes of the Roman elite. It was a brutal and calculated act, one that blurred the line between love and domination. Historical accounts of Nero's personal life are filled with similar patterns: manipulative, performative, and sometimes outright cruel. While it's difficult to separate fact from rumour, the threads of emotional violence and power games run deep. And then comes one of the most infamous allegations of all, a scandal so shocking that it still echoes through history. Some ancient writers claim that Nero engaged in an incestuous relationship with his mother, Agrippina the Younger. Suetonius wrote about it with tabloid energy. Tacitus mentioned it with caution. Both suggested that Agrippina may have used seduction to maintain her hold over her son as his power grew. But most modern historians believe this wasn't history, it was political character assassination. In Rome, scandal was a weapon, and nothing ruined a legacy faster than an accusation that broke sacred social codes. Whether true or false, the rumour stuck. It became part of Nero's myth, another piece of his increasingly monstrous reputation. But he wasn't alone in being the subject of such dark tales. The reign of Emperor Tiberius, Rome's second emperor, was also shrouded in mystery and whispers. In his later years, he withdrew from public life and secluded himself on the island of Capri, surrounded by luxury and isolation. What happened behind the marble walls of his seaside villas became the stuff of legend. Roman historians, always eager to dramatize, painted Tiberius as an aging ruler lost in indulgence, surrounded by young companions and engaged in behavior that shocked even his contemporaries. Whether the stories were true or not, they served a purpose. Roman historians rarely wrote with objectivity. They wrote to shape memory, and emperors who lost favor, in life or in death, often became targets of creative destruction. Still, the tales of Tiberius endure as warnings. When power goes unchecked behind closed doors, suspicion is never far behind. In ancient Rome, emperors weren't just political leaders. They were walking symbols, men who held divine authority, but also stood exposed to judgment, rumor, and rebellion. Their personal lives, no matter how private, always carried political weight. Whether it was Nero's marriages, Hadrian's devotion, Caesar's whispered secrets, or Tiberius's eerie retreats, their choices shaped the empire's legacy. Because in Rome, love, power, and reputation were never separate, they were tangled threads in the fabric of history.